Well, welcome back to Beyond the Sermon, where we take the sermons from the weekend and just dive deeper, unpack some of the questions, process through some of the things that were talked about. And this week's sermon was entitled Faithful Giving and Generous Living. And we unpacked a lot. There was a lot of great stuff that I'm excited for us to get to talk about. My, oh my. Will you bring us through just kind of a recap of what we've been talking through the series?
So 5-week series called Jesus, Money, and Stuff. I didn't want to rip off Randy Alcorn's book called Jesus. I think it's called Money, Possessions, and Eternity. But anyways, that's a great book, by the way. Just want to, heads up. But the whole goal was to talk about finances God's way, essentially.
Right.
And so I talked about what's God's view of money according to Scripture. I talked about stewardship. I called it God owns it, we manage it. I talked about how do we manage money, like when's enough? How do we spend? Why do we spend? Asking good questions. Talked about resisting the power of greed. How do we get free from the culture of excess? And then this last week, which is what we're diving into today, I talked about what does it mean to faithfully give? Principled giving. How do we live a generous life? That kind of is the main message that sometimes we hear from church, but I was like, I wanted to have one message on that and dive into it for these biblical practices and not the whole series be about that, because obviously we really do want to live a generous life. So the goal was to just talk about the 3 biblical practices that I can find in Scripture, which is tithing, giving offerings, and also giving alms, which we'll dive into in a little bit, and then really kind of summarize all that with the heart of generosity. Like what does it really look like to have a heart of generosity? It seems like if you just kind of take the temperature, most people might say, I'm not really super excited about giving. There are some people that would say that, but a lot of people probably aren't in that place. So what does the Bible say about having the right heart? How do we get there if we're not there? What practices do we start in, especially if we're not? What do we continue doing? What do we not do? What changes over time? Stuff like that. I just wanted to kind of dive into a bunch of the details, because oftentimes when I have this conversation about faithfully giving, principled giving, it seems like 7 out of 10, maybe more, the conversation can be a bit confrontational, or maybe it can be a bit of like various arguments as to why we shouldn't give or shouldn't give that much or shouldn't give as much as churches say. Anyways, I just hear a lot of that. So I wanted to dive into the Bible, and that's really what we tried to do.
Yeah,
and of course, like you can get all the practices right, but if you don't have the right heart, then it doesn't make it right. Like let's do the right thing, but not have the right heart. We want both.
Right.
So that was the key. That was the key for the message. Well, you were there. We have 3 services at Northwest Church. You were there Saturday night, if I'm not mistaken, sitting in the back like you do. Maybe you were sitting in the front. I can't remember. But anyways, you should probably sit in the front. But my question to you before we dive into anything else is, as you were listening to the message, what kind of hit you initially, just organically, the thing that came to your mind as you're just listening to the message? What struck you? It doesn't have to be a deep dive or anything, but just what did you think automatically?
Yeah. Well, first, I think the first thing that stood out to me, and you kind of mentioned it in the beginning, was of all the conversations that we could have, there's so many things that are happening in our culture, but this one seems to be the one that's difficult to have with the church around money. So that, I think that pulled me in at first of like, oh, wow, like this is a difficult topic, especially when we talk about like discipleship. And you've even mentioned through this series that I don't think people really see money as a discipleship issue when it really is. But the other thing, and I mentioned this to you too, that was really cool for me to see, especially when we talked about tithing, was just how the principle began even before the law was given in the Old Testament. And it's almost as if you could draw a line, through even to the Old Testament where the principle, or through to the New Testament, where the principle is still an important thing for us to carry out and live by today. And I thought that was really, really helpful because I've never really heard a sermon on tithing that has broke it down in this way, in a way that felt like clear and then also went to speak to some of the things that, maybe some of the issues or reasons we might have when it comes to this type of a topic. So that's what stood out to me the most, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, I want to say 20 years ago, I don't think I heard a lot of debates about tithing. I hear them all the time now. And I mean, if you just like gosh, if you're on TikTok or Instagram, just
Right.
type in tithing. I bet you, I'm not saying I'm right. I bet you 8 out of 10, 80% are probably basically, you could sum up the video by saying you don't have to tithe.
Mhm.
And I think that's kind of an interesting point. You don't have to. You aren't commanded to. And in most instances, I think people are saying you're not supposed to.
Right.
I actually think that's what they're saying. But then to me, when the majority voice tends to be, you don't have to, you shouldn't, you don't need to, you're not commanded to. If you keep hearing that message, I think something underneath it, what you lose is, well, why did God ask people to do it in the Bible anyways? I think it's easy to lose the purpose of something. So instead of like having a real biblical mindset about this of like, why did they tithe and what did the tithe pay for and why was it important to God and why did he end up putting it in the law to require it? And when they restored the temple in Jerusalem and the practice of worship in Nehemiah's day, why did God want them to restore the tithe? What was the purpose of that? It seems like so trivial. This is like one of the first things you do after rebuilding the wall in the temple, like get the tithe going again. And there it kind of ties into worship. So I just, for some reason, whenever I hear the arguments against something, I feel like it's so easy to lose the purpose of it. Yeah. And we don't even, if you were to ask people who argue against things like that, you just say, well, okay, why did God want it to begin with? Or where does it say it in the Bible in terms of what it's in order to discuss the practice itself? Where does it actually talk about it in the Bible? I don't know. So that's not a good answer. Mm-hmm. Okay, that's not a good answer. I'm not saying everybody doesn't know where it is in the Bible or doesn't understand the original teaching of it or the purpose of it, but it seems like when you have this like anti-message or this contrarian message, it's easy to kind of swallow up the purpose. And it's part of why I actually approached in the sermons, why I approached it with the 4 primary arguments that I have. These are the arguments that I've heard over the years, and the arguments have not changed. They've just gotten stronger. And I would actually say in the era of social media, they've just gotten actually more concise or like kind of pithy and bullet pointish, which I think is even easier to kind of lose our heritage or understanding of giving at all. And I don't think it's making people more generous. It doesn't mean we don't want to analyze scripture. We do. And that was really kind of the point of all this. Well, let's dive deeper into this. Okay. Let's start by kind of looking at the practices. The 3 biblical practices were tithing, giving offerings, and alms. If you look in the Bible, that's what you're going to find. Certainly when you switch over to the New Testament, there are different words that are used. Tithing is never used in the New Testament except for when Jesus affirmed it to the Pharisees, right? Before he went to the cross and was resurrected. And so obviously there's a lot to talk about there, and I did in the message. But what you find in the New Testament is the words generosity. You also find the word sharing, which is a financial word. It's not just, hey, share some cheesecake with me at dinner. It's a financial word. It's sharing what you have with others that may not have what you have or they're in need. Yeah. And then, of course, alms. And that was more assumed in the New Testament, even if the word itself isn't used. That's like mercy giving, compassion giving. Somebody needs food, somebody needs clothes. That kind of conversation is in the Old Testament, but it's also throughout the New Testament as well. So these are the practices. I just kind of want to jump into like some questions. And I know you had some questions as well, but some people say that tithing is just Old Testament law. Mm-hmm. Based on the sermon, your understanding, how do you respond to that?
Yeah, I think, and that's kind of when we talk about the wrestle that we have as Christians. I think that's something that you probably would hear people bring up you mentioned, like the word tithing isn't in the New Testament. But it was something you even talked about in your sermon was how, Paul's speaking to a specific audience of Gentiles, right? As a Jewish man, he grew up, this stuff was normal, like to tithe. They saw how this brought about, caring for the priest and worship. And I think you mentioned there was some 4,000 worshipers under David as well. So to a Jewish mind, this was normal. Mm-hmm. But to speak to somebody that is a Gentile, he's basically teaching them and talking to them about, hey, set aside, I think it was a money for each week, mm-hmm. and then we would gather this, and this would go to the church in Jerusalem. And so I would say, if someone's like wrestling through that, then one of the things you mentioned is, well, let's have a curiosity to look through all of the scriptures that talk about tithing and giving and generosity, mm-hmm. right? And what are the principles there, and what's the point behind why this was made in the first place, right? God commanded it in the Old Testament, right? In order for there to be a way for the priest to survive, for there to be worship, even things I didn't think of that you mentioned, the great feast that they would have. Like, who's paying for that, right? That's the whole community coming together.
Who pays for the wood to offer sacrifices?
Right.
Who pays for the cities of refuge? Who pays for the worshipers under the Davidic kingdom?
Yeah.
But even in the New Testament, we see some of those principles translate. So to me,
laying the money at the disciples' feet, apostles' feet, right? They're selling all that they have, and anybody that had a need, they're taking care of that. So we see a very generous church in the New Testament. Right. That's not as though that's lost or it's just looked different.
They had similar purposes. So if a person asks me straightforward, because here's the real issue. If somebody says, again, tithing is giving 10% of our income, that looked different then than it does today. But if somebody's saying, hey, Ben, are you really saying that God commands tithing in the New Testament? And my answer is no. I actually don't think you can find it anywhere in the New Testament where God commands it. But what I would argue, and I did in my message, is that the principle of tithing from the Old Testament, which is pre-law, in the law, starting in Leviticus, and then what we still see in the New Testament by using different words like sharing, generosity, people selling what they had, allowing the New Testament leaders, the church elders, to actually be the ones to distribute that. I actually think you see the principle. So what I would say is I would tell somebody, I believe in principled giving. And just in a practical sense, let's just move outside of the Bible for a second. If you don't have principled saving, if you don't have principled generosity, if you don't have principled living, if you don't cultivate generosity in your own life, the fact is you're just not going to do it very often, because setting aside money for specific purposes is what we all do. And so God in his wisdom did that before, and I believe that God in his word still encourages us to do that today and to care about kingdom priorities and to put that first. So we say, seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these other things, which are financial in nature, just the things that we need, all that will be added to you. This also means seek first the kingdom of God with your finances, with your heart, with your family, with your time, with your treasure, everything that you are, everything you have. When we're part of a local church, we're now part of a family, and pulling our resources together for the things that we value. That's why principled giving is necessary. If it was just based on when we feel like it, or then when we deem like we have enough, which in our culture, you'll never feel like you have enough. Principled giving, that's what the tithe was, to me actually bridges the gap and allows us to be able to fund the things that really do put God and his priorities first. And I just think it's the wisdom of God. That's why I still teach tithing today, not as a command, but as a principle.
Right.
I think that principle remains, and I would argue that, I would encourage that. I think there are reasons why people would say, well, it isn't a good thing, or it isn't a required thing. I don't argue the required thing, but I think it's a good thing. It's a godly thing. It's something the local church, the family of believers, as they pull together, should do so that we can continue to be that lighthouse in a community. That's going to look different. I've had people argue like, well, mega churches have mega budgets and mega this and mega that. I think if we want to argue like, are mega churches, or are there churches that are misusing funds and misappropriating funds, and are people doing this the wrong way? I think that's a conversation. I think we should and could have that conversation. I've had it many times. I just don't think it's the same conversation.
Right.
There's a difference between talking about should we give principally, should we put God first in that we give to and through the local church. I think that's one issue. Then we should also talk about how should the local church then give and disperse those funds. How should those funds be used? How much should a pastor make? All of that stuff needs to be discussed. But when you conflate the two, we really don't know what we're talking about. And so any misuse or abuse kind of becomes a reason why we shouldn't do it at all. And I just think I stay away from putting those two together. I can understand someone having questions, thoughts, considerations, past background abuse. They've seen stuff. Right. So have I. But I think when things are done healthy, which is our goal, Just because prayer wasn't done the right way, just because worship wasn't done the right way, just because certain things weren't done the right way doesn't mean we don't do them. It means we refine them and we make sure to do them the right way.
That's good.
And that's all it means to me. And so I think for me, I want to validate the fact that some people feel a certain way about this. I get that, but not everybody does. I mean, I told the story when I was 20 years old. I went to Assembly of God Church. I heard this evangelist, this big guy sweating all over, just talking about giving and tithing. And he's really drumming it up. It's emotional. He's getting ready to take the offering, and everybody's got to come up with their envelope in their hand one by one. 300 people have to like walk in front of this guy. I mean, it was a mess. And I don't recommend anything that he did at all. But what was amazing was he preached on tithing. That was the first time I ever heard it in my whole life that I can remember. And I believed it. And I never didn't practice it. I mean, always tithe from that moment on. And I'm not saying that to, woohoo, good job, Ben. I'm actually just simply saying that because faith was in my heart. Now, in those days, tithing was really easy. We're talking like $5 here,
Right.
$10 there.
Yeah, I get 10%.
And I think that just debunks the fact that sometimes we would think when I make more, it's easier to give more.
Yeah.
Actually, it was easier to give when I had less because it was only $5 or it was only $50 or $100. But then when I started making more money as a real estate agent, the most money I'd ever made when I had my own business, I remember the largest check I ever had to write, and I had more hesitation in that. And even though I had more money than writing that $50 check or $20 check. So the fact is that with increase, sometimes it's not easier to necessarily to give more. And so I just think it's important that we kind of pull back on the issue of tithing and principled giving and giving regularly, and really ask like, what does God want us to do? And
I think people have it. Probably part of the reason that we're kind of wrestling here too is maybe we just most of what we get is from culture, or people haven't talked about it before. Like I said, I haven't really ever heard a message on tithing, I don't think, ever. So I've heard, you get the kind of the push and a little bit of a, conversation. This is what tithing is, is a form of worship, all of these things, and it's mentioned. But to have a conversation like this, I think most people might come in with just what they've talked to amongst one another, or maybe what they've heard online, or past experiences. And so when you come to a conversation about tithing, it can feel a certain way. But I love that word principle. I think it just speaks to like this is an important part of what if God has set something that we see throughout the Bible that has been beneficial, and why don't we want to step into all that He has for us, right? And the fruit of that, right? Part of that, I think, is when you give to the local church, as you mentioned, there are things that facilitate the mission of God. So for you and just in the local church in general, how have you seen like giving facilitate that mission, God's mission?
Yeah, this is an important one because I haven't always been a pastor or a lead pastor at that. I've always given, and I think for the first several years, I didn't necessarily know where the money went, but then I became a part of the board of the church that I was a part of originally, and I did know what the budget was. I did know where the money went, and I did know how the church spent it. And so I could see that mission was a part of everything. So for example, like I think people have different core values. That's why some like to not give to like the general fund. So like at our church, if you go online, you can give to the general fund, you can give to missions, you can give to the food pantry, you can give to benevolence. And some people will go online and they'll say general fund. And they're like, I ain't giving to general fund. I don't generally know where that goes. So it's not attractive. It doesn't touch my core values. So they're like, I'm going to give to missions because that touches a core value, or I'm going to give to benevolence that touches a core value. But what people don't realize when they do that, general fund actually just makes up the 80 funds that make up our whole budget that we have appropriated, like most of us do with a budget, in order to do what God's called us to do. So when we think about mission, like we wouldn't have a building. And I realize some people would say, well, churches don't need buildings. Well, they don't need buildings, but it is difficult. I've actually been a part of a church where we were set up and tear down and we were renting, and it was very difficult to do all the stuff that we do today. And we did a fraction in that church of what we at Northwest Church can do because of a building. A building's a resource. It doesn't define the church. It's just the house for the family. That's all it is. But we have Bible studies here. We have events here. We have outreaches here. We have gatherings. We have prayer ministry. We have so much worship that happens here. People are built up. People are equipped. People share spiritual gifts, and then they're sent out. That is mission. Gathering for church is not just a religious thing. It's a biblical thing. We don't forsake the gathering together of one another, and we build each other up, provoking each other to love and good deeds. This is what God has called us to do according to his word. And having this resource is part of our mission. Utilities cost money. Everything costs money. Having pastors, having full-time pastors that can devote their time and their attention to the details so that we can organize more, we can reach more, we can do more. I know it's attractive, and I just want to say it this way. I realize that it's attractive to give to an organization, and that organization shows you a video, and it says, we're going to feed starving people here, and we're going to minister to this natural disaster there. And I think that's great. But what people don't often realize is when you give to an organization, there are people that have to organize in order to get those funds there. And the church is no different. It requires people to actually facilitate the ministry. The majority of churches, unless they're smaller, do have to have somebody that's paid to organize more. You can't do more without having more attention, more time, more focus. And so to me, I gladly fund, whether I'm a pastor or not, whether I'm paid by the church or not, I gladly have always funded the fact that we have leaders who can organize, who can focus on things, and can lead the charge so that the rest of the church can follow through with God's priorities. But I think it's important to recognize that 20% of our giving, of our budget, is going to go towards the building. But that building is a massive resource, and I'm thankful for it, and I gladly do that. 48% is going to go towards the leadership or those that are staff. Another 20% is going to go towards discipleship, outreach, and missions. At our church, I think if you add up all the money, it's probably somewhere between $700,000 and $850,000 a year that's going out to missions and outreach and all of that type of stuff. And so when I think about what impacts mission, I think every dollar that comes into this church that is appropriated in our budget, I believe touches mission in one way or another. I just do. And I think that even if it doesn't touch my core value, like if I were to chop up our budget into 80 different things, which one would I give to? Well, there's certain things I have core values on, and I think everybody else does. But giving to the general fund actually hits all 80 of those things. And it actually touches mission in one way or another. They all overlap so that we can do what God's called us to do here in this city. And that's true for every church. So for me, principled giving allows us to continue to grow and do all that God has asked us to do. And then we have special offerings once in a blue moon, maybe one or two a year, where we can raise funds specifically. Like last year, we raised $150,000 so that we could support our brothers and sisters in Rwanda.
That was amazing.
And help build that Bible college, which is going to cost them $500,000. It costs 10 to 20 million here, but it's going to cost them $500,000, and they're almost finished. So our church gave that much money. That was a special above and beyond offering. And I'm really proud of our congregation for that. And so this all touches mission. I mean, to your point, it just everything. I think of every dollar that comes in one way or another, touches mission. Even buying chairs for people to sit on in our sanctuary, paying for the lights. I mean, geez, all of it. Actually, I heard a story one time. This is really silly, so whatever. But anyways, it's beyond the sermon. So, but I was really impacted by the Brownsville revival in Pensacola, Florida, 1995. It started 1995 on Father's Day, where evangelist Steve Hill preached at Brownsville Assembly of God, and a revival broke out, and it touched over 5 million people from around the world. People went to Pensacola, Florida, which is, by the way, I've never been there. I'll never go to Pensacola, Florida.
Not necessarily a destination.
Yeah, it's like going to Bothell, Washington.
Right.
Nobody knows, nobody cares. So this church has revival break out in such a powerful way where people are flying in from all over the world from 95 to 2000. So
Wow.
For 5 years, they have revival. They almost gather every single night from that week on, almost every single night. So day and night they're gathering, they're having church gatherings, they're equipping the saints, they start a Bible college, people are sent out all over the world. It's incredible. So they have this revival. And I remember the pastor of that church, John Kilpatrick, he gave this sermon. It was like maybe during the daytime or something, and I happened to be watching it years ago. And he said he was receiving an offering, and he just discussed like how important it is to give and sow into what God was doing. And he commented on how people would give a rebuttal, and it's very popular to push back on the church asking for money and all this kind of stuff. And he said, we prayed for revival for years, then God gave it to us, and then we couldn't financially handle it. And I thought that was interesting. We prayed for it, but will we pay for it? And so it sounds odd. It sounds like a typical like TBN evangelist, like, send in your 1995. But he was actually saying, this was the interesting part. He said, we had to build a second sanctuary to host. We had 2,500 people. Then we had another 500 in overflow. Then we hosted another. So they had like 5,000 to 7,000 people like on campus. People were outside, in the halls, in all the rooms. He's like, do you realize how much money it costs just to buy toilet paper?
Wow. Yeah.
So that we could have a revival gathering every single night? 5 million people came here. And he said, we had to build bathrooms. We didn't have enough bathrooms. We had to purchase, they had like outdoor bathrooms. They had to set up and build another. He just said, people don't even understand like how much money it costs to do this. So when we receive offerings, we don't want your money. We just want to keep doing what we believe God has called us to do. And we will manage it the best way that we can. Yeah. But you can't pray for something you don't want to pay for. And it always touched me when he said that. I realized that I didn't have quite the right thinking on things. I would fund it prayerfully, but would I fund it financially? That was the challenge that he gave. This was back in 1999. And I thought, yeah, we all want to ask God to do this thing, but what it will also require from us, his people in obedience, is all the follow through.
Yeah.
And I think that's, when you ask the question about mission, I think, You need people that are on fire. You need people that are obedient. You need people that are willing to do anything and share with anyone and go anywhere. But all of that's going to cost money too. So the follow-up to the fire in our hearts and the willingness to obey it's just going to require money. And yeah, we say God has all the money, but he puts it into the hands of his people. And I think that's what makes, hopefully, the New Testament church, what makes the church should be the safest place for people to invest their money. It
Amen.
should be.
Amen.
100% should be. So everything we do should be missional and should touch mission one way or another. That's what I think. Yeah, that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Shoot, that's good stuff.
Yeah.
And that's cool to hear just even how that specific thing touched you. Because if you think about it, man, like there's so many things, like you said, you're right, that we do. Even I'm just thinking about when we took the kids to Mexico, like that cost money. But the church was just so generous, and the way they took care of us and our fundraisers and different things that we did. And I think even just speaking to how that specific, message from Steve encouraged you. Have you ever seen somebody who maybe they started kind of like hardened more towards tithing or questioning, or maybe they came from a place of hurt, and something happened that like transformed that for them, where they started to see things like, okay, maybe this is something I want to partner with God in, and what did that look like? Has that ever happened? Or
yeah, I have discussed with people who came from more of a mega church, and they felt that it was a word of faith type church, and the pastors were making incredible amounts of money, and the way that they lived and dressed and modeled themselves and presented themselves online. The folks that were under that ministry eventually kind of became sick to that and felt that they were actually sowing more into the lives of the pastors than they were actually the church and the mission of the New Testament church. Yeah. And it really hurt them. And I get that. And I don't think it's everybody's story, but it certainly was a few people's story that I've come to know, and they've shared that with me. And so it made them really hesitant. Like, I don't want to give to a church because they saw that. And it kind of made them sick. And so just out of respect for that, like anybody that's gone through any kind of pain or shame or mismanagement or whatever, the opposite of what the church should be and do, I respect that. I wouldn't want to push somebody, beyond where they kind of need healing. But at the same time, the bad example doesn't trump the truth. And so I've walked with people where I've encouraged them. And I've even said, I will say it to our church, like, if you don't feel like Northwest Church is the safest place for you to give tithes and offerings, then you need to go find a church that you can trust.
Yeah.
I hope that's what we are. I believe that's what we are. I say that's what we are. Our books are open. But the fact is that if you're in a place where you can't practice biblical generosity, I think you need to find a place where you can. So our story can't be a way out of something. Our story has to be ultimately redemptive. And so, yeah, I've walked with people where they've been able to trust again. They've been able to receive the truth again and it not be questionable to them. And they feel that they can participate in what the truth of God's word says. But yeah, I've walked with a number of people where that's been the case. I would also say I've walked with people who have just never been taught this.
Yeah.
And I think when they first hear like, tithe, you're asking me to give 10% of my income? Are you nuts? That's way too much. I've heard that straight up, like, that's way too much.
Yeah.
So then I like to ask people, I go, well, what's the percentage that you would feel comfortable with?
Mm-hmm.
And they'll say, well, maybe 3% or 2% or 1% or 5%. And I go, okay, do you give that currently? Or are you saying that you would? And a lot of times, they haven't taken that step yet. And so what I would just encourage people is to start somewhere.
Yeah.
And I have over the years. I'm like, hey, if you feel like this is too big of a jump, start with principled giving and let the Lord speak to you. Study this for yourself and ask the Holy Spirit to lead you and guide you in generosity. I don't want just to be I don't want to just be at the church, but cultivate a generous heart and a generous life. And so, yeah, I've encouraged so many people over the years. In fact, almost everybody that I've personally discipled, I have personally discipled financially as well in giving. And almost all of them started out giving nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And if you ask them straightforward, hey, do you tithe or have you ever given? And the answer is usually no. And either they weren't taught or it was just such a strong thing, like a difficult thing, like, hey, I don't have enough. There was always some kind of hold back. I don't have enough, which is also can be a reflection of the fact that you don't have a budget, personal budget either. So that can be that. Not always the case. For anybody that wants to criticize this, I realize that there are exceptions, but usually, yeah, that's the case.
Well, even I think one thing that was helpful for me to see is like even everybody is tithing to something.
Yeah. Right.
Just to if you look at where your money goes, like you are saying with what you spend on what you actually value.
Yeah.
And so it's a good that was I think a good. I think I might have heard that from you.
Yeah. I've said that's actually back in the interns. I used to say that to all of our interns, and I used to I'd get a whiteboard out, and I'd say, okay, I would ask people how much money they make, and they'd say, I make $13 an hour. And so I'd say, how many hours do you work? And so we end up saying, okay, you make $18,000 a year. And I'd put that on the whiteboard in front of all the interns. And then I would just say, okay, well, I've watched you go to Starbucks pretty regularly, I would say daily. And let's just say you buy a drink and you buy a sandwich. And back then it was probably $10 or whatever. So I was like, all right, $10 a day, you make $18,000 a year, $10 a day on if there's 30 days in a month, that's $300 a month. Times that by 12. So we're talking about what? 3,030, is my math right? 300. So $3,600 a year. You make $18,000 a year. If you go to Starbucks and you spend $10 a day, that's $3,600 a year. What's that percentage? I don't have my calculator right now, but I'm pretty sure that's more than 10%. Am I wrong? Yeah. Yeah, that is 10%. Actually, if you do the math, $18,000 a year, $3,600, right? That'd be 18. Yeah. I don't know, 20%, whatever it is. But I used to do that on the whiteboard, and I would show them, you are tithing to something. Now you need food, but you're not willing to make food at home and bring it with you to internship. That's your deal. So you want to buy coffee and you want to eat at Starbucks for $10 a day, and you are spending way more than 10% of what you take in a year. You're doing that. And so what if you actually because we had free coffee there, what if you actually drank free coffee? And what if you brought food from home and then you just gave 5%? Because right now you're giving 0, and you gave it to kingdom priorities. What about that? Or what if you just had the coffee and not the food? And I would always challenge them. And my point wasn't to get money from them. My point was to say that at some point with your finances, you have to put God's priorities first. You don't just want to receive from something that you're also not contributing to. I mean, think about it like this. Every time we stand up in our church and we say, hey, we have an opportunity to give. Now, again, there's wealth disparity, so I do know that some people just can't give. And I always say, give something. If you have $1, give $1. Always participate in the opportunity to bring about a testimony. And that's what we miss too, is that when we have an opportunity to give and we bring that to the church and we say, here's what we were able to do. We were able to basically pay for a third of a Bible college to go up that's going to equip people in Rwanda, where the government's requiring the churches for pastors to have accredited degrees. So we are contributing towards that so that churches don't get closed and the Church of Jesus Christ can advance. So we gave $150,000. I don't remember how many donors that was. But when we stand up and we say that to our church, our congregation, we say, look what we were able to do. We means everybody that gave $1. It doesn't mean those that didn't. So everybody goes, yeah, that's so awesome. But if you clapped and if you celebrated with us, you're celebrating in what we did, but not what you did. And so to me, I'm not teaching this because I want people's money. I didn't get that money, but I want every person in this church to participate in the testimony and the celebration of what God did through us. But you can get excited and you can think, this is such a wonderful church. But I want that church to include our own participation. Yeah. And that means our children. So we value these things by financially as well, but not all of us can give 100. Not all of us can give 1,000. I get that. But I always encourage people, even when they don't have a lot, give $1. And that might sound crazy to people, and I really don't care. I really don't care. Yeah. Because I believe that when you contribute at whatever level that you can, that you get to celebrate the testimony. And that's so important for people to recognize. Otherwise, it's what they did and it's not what we did. And again, if somebody just doesn't have anything to their name, awesome, pray. If you can't do anything else, just pray. But I want everyone to celebrate the testimony as much as we would welcome the opportunity. That's just super important to me.
Yeah, amen.
Yeah, that would become a part of it.
Yeah, when you want people to get to even to experience just the value of like, I got to give to that, and here's the fruit of that. Even Jesus valued the woman who brought what looked like little to everybody else, but it was a lot for her. It was important. For her and for Jesus. Jesus sees you in the middle of that, and he's looking for the heart. What do you think a Christian misses out on when, like, as you said, maybe they give when they feel like it, or they decide not to, or what do we miss out on when we don't participate with the local church in this way?
I think we miss out on the feeling that we're in this together. I think we because we didn't get to participate in that aspect of it. And I realize, like, for example, let's just say like serving and leadership and all the stuff that the church does. Not everybody's going to lead a small group. Not everybody's going to teach a class. Not everybody's going to serve in kids ministry. And to your point, or to your ministry, not everybody's going to serve in youth. Not everybody's going to teach from the front. Not everybody's going to lead in worship. Not everybody's gifted the same. Not everybody's capacitated the same. Not everybody has the same amount of time. So the fact is that nobody should feel bad in the church because they can't do everything or they can't do that thing. So our vision here at Northwest is everybody does one thing. That's it. So we all serve, but where you serve and how you serve doesn't matter. So we want to encourage people, everybody contributes, right? We all bring something to the table, like a potluck. The church isn't a restaurant where we come and then something is served to us. We are a big potluck. That's what the church is. That's the metaphor that I use. It's like Thanksgiving. Everybody is a part of that. Everybody, somebody plates the table, somebody mashes the potatoes, somebody makes sure the turkey is good, people bring their desserts, everybody brings something, everybody participates. So it doesn't matter what you do when it comes to serving, we all do something. And that in that way, we are the church, we are the family. I think with giving, it's the same. We don't all give the same amount. We don't all have the same means, but we all get to participate in that we funded this. It's not they funded that. Because when we don't give to and through the local church, what we are saying by not giving ever, and again, minus people that maybe have just, I can't give anything. Okay, fine. There's some people that I don't want anybody to feel guilty if that's the case. But for those of us that could give something and we don't, we're saying everyone else should and we don't have to. Or worse, think about what this could even be worse, how far this could go. We're saying, no Nobody should.
Mm.
Because if everybody did what we did, this wouldn't exist. We would just be meeting in homes, and whatever the fruit would be, what the fruit would be. I mean, that's, I don't know. I mean, we should probably talk about that.
That's true.
But that's why I'm passionate about it, is because to me, like, I'm not going to be the pastor of this church forever. So I'm going to step down someday, and I'm going to give, and I'm going to serve. And that's what I'm going to do. I'm not going to lead. I'm going to give and serve and support gladly, willingly, 100%, all in. But the next generation has got to take this. I don't just want older people who have more means to give. I want younger people to give what they can. I want our children to give what they can. I want our young people to learn. I want our middle-aged people to learn. People that have, oh man, everything's expensive. I want our college students who are stretched to be able to give a few dollars, whatever, because we all have to feel like we're a part of this. We all have, the rubber has to meet the road at some point. So when you ask, like, what are we missing out on? I think just the togetherness, like this is what we do together. We do a lot of things separately. We do a lot of things as individuals. But this is one thing that we fund together. It's not my thing. It's not your thing. Because someday I'm not going to be leading this. It's going to be somebody else. And I wasn't always a pastor, a vocational pastor paid by some paycheck. I had a business, and I gladly wrote those checks knowing what it went to. I just think we miss out on valuing all the things that we both receive and give to. I want to ask you a question.
What's up?
We'll transition a little bit. I don't know how much time we have left. So if these guys, if you're still with us right now, you bear with us through the conversation about tithing and giving. You're holding on, man. What's Pastor Ben going to say? I don't know. I probably won't even watch or listen to this again because I don't want to hear myself. But you're a youth pastor. Why do you think young people struggle with giving to the church, or giving gifts, being generous? Let's just talk about being generous. Do you think young people do?
Yeah, and I might say for maybe various reasons. I think one is they probably don't think about it, or it's not a principle that's really taught.
Why don't young people think about it?
I think it's because it's not really a principle that's talked about. And
because it's not super attractive in youth ministry.
Right. Nobody wants to talk about, tonight, chairs that you're sitting in right now, that Italian soda we made you that was for free was not free. You know?
But you need to have a message like, if you want to thrive, then you need to tithe.
Amen. Okay. If you got nothing in your wallet, slap your wallet, be ye filled.
Yeah. Times are hard, put it on the card. Oh, that's right. You guys don't have cards. All right, never mind.
We got to get Carrie to put this on t-shirts or something.
Yeah. It's not exciting. It's not exciting.
No, it isn't. It isn't exciting.
You think it's not fair? Who paid for the chair? I'm not really sure. I don't know what you do.
I'm writing these down.
How do you inspire young people to give? It feels like such a stretch. So I'm asking you, how do you do that? How do you help young people value the things that maybe they don't see? Because I raised you, and I know that raising you didn't always value the water that you took a shower with. You didn't always value the food that was at the dinner table. You didn't always value the mattress that you slept on. You didn't always I'm just going to keep going. You didn't always value the front door that you walked through. Amen. You didn't always value the lights that were turned on. So I do think there's a maturation in all this, right?
Totally.
How do, if you were just to think strategically through this with me, how do you help inspire young people to be givers and care about this, that it's a priority?
That's a great question. I think part of it is one, they got to see it, right? So more of it, there's that saying, more is taught or caught than taught, right? So, but we also have, are we teaching it too? Because there has to be some teaching. I think being an open book, and we are here as a church, you can look at our, finances, you can see where the money goes to. And I think even helping them to see, like, even when you and I have had conversations around, well, how do you think that this happens, or this is this way? And I think the first time when we were at Mill Creek Forest Square Church, and we had one of those weeks where Pastor Chris was breaking down where all the finances go. I think personally for me as a young person, looking at that and going like, oh, wow, like this is how much it costs to keep the AC going. This is how much it costs to, do that event that we did. This is how much it costs to do camp, right? Just really seeing, kind of laying it out, I think, for people to see is also helpful, so that they can see actually we're not just talking numbers or whatever, but this is like real. These are things that impact me personally, and having some sort of buy-in in that way, and speaking to, this, when you're young, you're not making a whole lot of money. And you do think, when I make more money, for whatever reason, I'm going to give more. But speaking to that lie, the reality is like more money, as others have said, mo problems, baby.
Carrie Welch.
Yeah, very well. Yeah.
Yeah.
But the truth is, I think money just maximizes what already was there, right? So if you don't have a budget, if you're not careful with it, it's going to be the same, but just with more money. So having that principle be taught, having it be something that we see in our leaders, and being willing to like go to maybe speak to some of the hurt, that some people have felt in different environments where maybe they felt like the church didn't handle it in a way that could have been handled well. Those are the things that I would say.
How many times have you talked to someone that has told you personally they didn't see the church handle it well?
Me personally, this is I don't think I've ever had that conversation with anybody, surprisingly. I think a lot of it does come, and especially when we talk about with our youth, is coming from social media, right? So you'll have an online personality or somebody, you'll come across something, and this happens with me, whatever the algorithm is, and you get somebody that says, well, this, and this, and you don't know the person, you can't verify things or not, and this stuff does happen. And so I think, again, because maybe our students haven't had this conversation with family, or maybe it's not shown in their family, or maybe it hasn't been a conversation in the church, that's the only talk they've ever had maybe about tithing. Yeah. And so then that is what forms their perspective, right? And so then you have a conversation on a Sunday, we're going through a sermon series through Monday, and you get baptized. You're like, whoa. This is really, what the Bible says. This is what am I, how do I navigate through some of the things, that I'm hearing from culture, which is why I loved how you even broke down, here's the 4 things that you hear. Because I think that's where most people, probably in my experience, again, we're not speaking every person, there's going to be people that don't fit into that. But for me personally, I've never had that conversation with someone who said, yeah, I've had this hurt or something that's happened and I don't give as a result of that.
Yeah, I think to your point, I think it comes from media. Mm-hmm. It comes from personalities who are contrarian and maybe had a real painful thing. There are I've only had a handful of those conversations for sure. And in Seattle, we don't have a lot of mega churches where this is kind of the case. Okay, moving to generosity, generous living kind of stuff. I do get this question at times. I want to throw it to you. People do want to ask me like, hey, when like people have signs when you pull into Starbucks or Fred Meyer's or whatever, the grocery store, and there are homeless people standing there with signs, and they say, don't have a job, need food, anything helps, God bless. If we're generous people as Christians, do we give every time we see somebody ask? Somebody would ask me that question. Do we, I've even had people challenge me and say, Pastor Ben, I've heard you say that you always say yes. Every time somebody asks, you always say yes. And so that's part of being a generous person, even if it's only $5. And I actually have said that. I have said, I will give whenever I'm asked, no matter what, even if it's $5, $2, whatever I can afford, I will always give. The answer is always yes. And so that was thrown back at me in this challenge. Like, so every time somebody asks, every time somebody walks into the church and says, I have a need, you give? And the answer to that is no. I don't give every time someone asks when it's unvetted. I don't give every time that I see a need that comes up on media, or I drive by a person with a sign. No, if I don't know you and I can't vet the situation, I don't know what I'm giving to. And when that's the case, I don't think that that's necessarily compassion. I don't necessarily think that's generosity. It might be the right heart, but it may not be the right method, or may not be the right place to give. I would always tell people, be spirit-led. You're not restricted by the word to give away, but it's not always wise. It can hurt as well. Mm-hmm. It doesn't always help. So I can think of a number of examples where people have asked me for money or asked the church for money, and we've said no. In fact, you could go on our Google reviews, and there's at least like 2 or 3 people that will say, this church is terrible. Mm-hmm. I moved from out of state to this state. I went to the church, and they said they only give to members. In fact, I'm just thinking of somebody that just wrote a Google review like 6 months ago. And they basically filled out a benevolence application online. We've never met them. They've never gone to our church. And they wanted us to pay their rent. And so they filled out a benevolence application. And we said, no, we don't do that. We do that for members. By members, what we meant was people that go to church here, people that
Right.
we
We have a
know,
relationship with.
situations that we
Mhm.
vet. We're not, we don't have like this incredible amount of money sitting around that we can just pay people's rent or buy stuff for people. We don't know you. And so we encourage this person to come to the church, and then they just blasted us on Google reviews. Just that's another thing. Don't be careful when you're reading those reviews, because almost all of the negative reviews that I've ever seen with our church, minus maybe 2 of them, which are deeply different from what really happened, they're from people we don't even know. I don't even know who these people are. They just filled out an application, wanted us to like write them a check. So obviously, like, that isn't generosity. That isn't just compassion. We can't do that. We shouldn't do that. That's not in the world we live in. That's not Christianity. I guess or generosity. My question to you is that, have you ever been challenged by this proposition, this idea that you need to give whenever the need is put in front of you? And how did you learn wisdom in that? Like, what's been your process and whether you're walking other people through it or yourself,
Yeah.
how have you balanced the idea of generosity and wisdom?
Totally. I think the biggest thing, like you said, is like sometimes, especially usually what confronts me or just in real life, you see somebody, holding a sign, or you're walking into a store or something and someone is asking for money. And you do, as a Christian, like, you are compassionate and you're merciful, and like your heart, like you don't want to see this. And like, if you could, just give this person everything that they need, and that would change their life, and that would be amazing, right? But you know that, one, you don't know this person, and I think there's a wrestle of like, if I give this money, where does this going to go to? And so oftentimes, personally for me, I think just through having conversation and like I said, when I give somebody money, what I don't know, where does that go? I decided, especially when we were at Mill Creek, we were faced with this a lot because, just where we were at,
Yeah, people came in all
there
the
was
time.
all the time. And so there was typically like a Subway or different things like that. And so I just say, hey, do you want food? I'd be happy to like get you food, because then I know exactly
Yep.
what this is going to, and I want to help you. Like, if that's what you need, that's what you need. And it's surprising that there was some that would take me up on that, and oftentimes there wouldn't be. And they would just want money or cash, and,
Right.
and for whatever reason, I don't know, right? But I think that's the struggle sometimes is you don't know. And when you give to something, it like, for instance, when we were bringing up the school that we're building, helping to build by sending $150,000, like, we know what that's going to, and we'll get to see the progress, and just and even just thinking about all the pastors that will come out of that, the fruit, the churches, like.
Yep. It's
That's
a vetted
something that's
need. It's a vetted
tangible,
need.
that we can look to and go, this is where that's going. In the same way, in an everyday situation where, another one I've run into is, and this is probably, I can count on my hands how many times this happened, but somebody needs gas. Like, okay, like, I see their cars right there, and I can say no if I want to, if it feels like a fishy situation. But you know what? I'll put $40 in, and I can see the gas go right into their car. Like, I know that I'm giving towards something that maybe it helped them, maybe it didn't. I don't know their situation, but those are things that we can vet. Like you said, if someone. Typically, in real life, if I get a message from somebody or a call from a number I don't know, I'm not going to give them money. It's typically, like a scam, right? And so having that vet relationship, those kinds of things, I think having conversations, even how I've grown in this area, is just talking to you and others that give. And what do you think about this situation? Should I give to this?
Mm-hmm.
And what I love, a principle you have said, is like, you won't ask people to give to something that you're not giving to. Like, you're giving to it as well.
Yeah.
And that's that challenged me. I know you said that a couple of times, but for me as well, like, I don't. So for instance, when we did the Mexico mission trip, I gave to that as well, and pay. When we do fundraisers and stuff like that, I don't want to just ask people to give money to camp, and then I'm not investing in it as well. And so it's a great principle to have. And I think it's important that we do, relationally, we do get to see this stuff benefit.
I think being a generous person, it requires action.
Mm-hmm.
It just requires action. Like, you can feel however you want. You can even say about yourself, I'm a generous person, and you can define that however you want. if somebody asks me, are you a generous person? I think people think that, but I always feel like I want to be more generous. That's just how I feel. And part of it's that tension of like, I can do more. And I think people that get to a place of generosity in their life, they feel that way. I can do more. I want to do more. They don't stop where they are and celebrate themselves. Like, man, I'm a really generous person, man. I wish everybody could be like me. I'm not the model. I'm not the example. God is. Jesus Christ is. We follow him. I think of all these scriptures that compel us towards generosity, and I just want them to carry attention in my heart. I live in a culture of excess. I want more things than I should have. I want newer upgrades more, just as much as anybody else. I don't always do it, but there are times where I have. And I just think to push back on greed, to push back on want, I have to push into generosity. And that has to do with practical stuff. So we talked a lot about giving to and through the local church, which is 100% what we should do. But I just think being a generous person has to do with the life that you live. And part of the way that it begins in your life or perpetuates is you have to see the needs. You can't turn away from them. And I think that it's a mentality, it's a mindset. If somebody said, how do you get that? How do you get that heart? How do you get that? You just got to pray for it.
Yeah.
And you have to recognize that when you see the need, if you can notice that you're turning away, turn back, see it. I don't want to drive by homeless people and be like, and turn away.
Right.
Even if I don't give, I don't want to turn away.
Right.
Because I don't know their story. And even if I don't give to somebody, I don't know their story and I won't judge it. I mean, I told this story one time. I was at our grocery store down the street and this guy walks up to me and I knew he was going to ask me for something. He goes, hey man, you going into the store? And I said, yeah. And he goes, could you get me something? And like you said, one thing we can do is give food. So I was like, yeah, what do you need, man? I'll take care of you. And he said, I want some milk. And I said, oh, okay, you want like a thing of milk? He goes, yeah, I want like a gallon of milk. It's just like, he's an average sized guy. I'm a big guy. He's an average sized guy. He's like, I want a gallon of milk. He's got no car. It's like, are you staying around here? Cause like, you can't drink that whole thing. He goes, yeah, I'm staying over there tonight. I was like, all right, man, a gallon of milk. You want whole milk? You want 1%? What do you want? He's like, I want whole milk, man. I was like, all right, I'm going to get you a gallon of milk.
Good stuff.
And then he said, and I want chicken. And I go, okay, the Safeway in there, they have fried chicken. You want some fried chicken? You want me to get you a bag of fried chicken or whatever? He goes, no, I want the rotisserie chicken.
Oh, wow.
And then he literally points right in the store and you can see it not far from where we were, right there. And he said, don't give me the yellow one. I want the green one. The green one has certain herbs and spices. I mean, he just dictated to me exactly what kind of chicken. And I said, okay, let me get this straight. You want a gallon of whole milk and you want the green package of a whole rotisserie chicken, herbs and spices. Do I have that right? And he said, yeah, just this average size, smaller guy in the parking lot of the grocery store. And I walk in and I buy a chicken and a gallon of milk. And I needed like one thing from the store. So I come out, I got a little bag and I got a big bag. And I give him the big bag. I'm looking for him. I finally find him. And I give him the chicken and I give him the milk. And he said, thanks, man. And then he just walked off. And this other guy walks up to me as he walks away and he says, what'd he get you for?
No.
He told me. I was like, what? I'm just going to the store to buy something. This guy walks up to me, what'd he get you for? And I said, well, sir, I bought him a gallon of milk and a whole rotisserie chicken. And he says, oh man, yeah, yesterday he got me for, and then he like listed this whole thing that I didn't really, the guy that said that to me, I was kind of embarrassed to tell him like I bought him these two, they're just funny things. I've never had somebody ask me for these two things.
Right.
But the guy characterized this person differently than I would. I don't care. My generosity didn't stop and think about what did he get me for.
Right.
He got me for nothing. I willingly gave that guy what he asked for. Was it strange to me? Yes, it was strange. Yeah. But that's what he wanted and that's what I gave him. And I felt no kind of way about that. I was absolutely fine with it. But the guy behind me was like, what did he get you for? And if somebody were to, I'm just kind of thinking out loud, if somebody were to ask me like, how do you be a generous person? you can't think like that.
Mm.
No offense to the guy that said that to me, but
Yeah.
I cannot think he got me for that.
Right.
He didn't get me for nothing. That was
Mhm.
my decision. I did it. I'd gladly do it again.
Right.
If I saw him again and he said, now I want non-fat and I want half a rotisserie chicken, original flavor, I would still buy him the chicken and some milk. You know what I'm
Right.
saying? Like, it wouldn't matter. I want to be generous.
Mhm.
I want to live a certain kind of way. I want to live in a lifestyle where I'm not thinking people are getting me. Nobody's
Right.
getting me. I
Mhm.
love the Lord and I love people, and I think that's the key.
Mhm.
And I think if you live that way, even if somebody like, I mean, ever thought about Judas was the one
Yeah.
that actually carried the money box around
Mhm.
with Jesus and the disciples? And like, let's just all be honest here. Jesus knew.
Mhm.
Jesus knew. So did he steal from that money box? I don't know. But there certainly came a time where Judas had a lot to say about the woman who broke the perfume, the vial of
Right.
perfume that was a year's worth of wage, where
Mhm.
he and others said this is a waste. So, and Jesus said, this is not a waste. What she did was a waste to you. But this will be told everywhere the gospel is told. This woman's story of her sacrifice and her offering will always be told. I think we just need to live in a way where we are compelled into the more of giving, not manipulated into it, but compelled by God and his word and the Spirit of God. Never should we be in a position where we like, what'd he get you for?
Yeah.
That's not the perspective that we have. And even if someone, let's just say this, even if someone took advantage of me, of my generosity, I won't let them have that testimony. Even if those funds were misused, honestly, and this isn't for anybody else, nobody has to say this, nobody has to submit to my thought on this, but personally, even if I gave my money to Judas, I really gave it to the Lord. That's how I feel. Nobody got me. I willingly gave it. Does it feel a certain kind of way? I don't like it. I don't like that it was misused, but I gave it to the Lord. And if you act in faith, then all you have to worry about is your relationship with God.
Yeah.
And I just think God never overlooks that. Things that are done in faith for the Lord, I just believe that they please him.
Yeah. He looks to the heart.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think that's the challenge that I would give, is that I don't want to give my money to Judas. Okay. But and the only way that you can stay where you want to stay is never do. Always give your money to the Lord in whatever you do. It's always to the Lord. This is what you believe he would do to the best of your knowledge and ability.
Yeah.
And it's not always perfect. That's it. So live a generous life.
And one thing I see, I think that really empowers moments like that for people who might either be really like they have money, but they're like kind of rigid with it, or not, like they may look at that situation like, I don't know where this is going to go or whatever. I don't want to give. Or those who, you can have the other side where it's just like every situation I see, like I want to give towards. I think and it's a principle you've taught us with this is to budget, to be stewards.
Yeah.
So we have personally for us, and someone was asking me like, well, how do I do this after your message? I feel like there's a freeing sense when you know in your budget, this is how much I've set aside specifically for a situation to where I can give when I see a need. Whether that's somebody that's, asking me for money as I go into the grocery store, or I'm, at a restaurant and I'm just noticing, I feel a sense of God of like, I should give more to this waiter or waitress and tip more, whatever, like a situation that I'm in. It's so empowering. It's really helpful because I think when I didn't do that, it was based on like, how do I feel, or just in moments. And I never really thought to be like always, am I ready for God to use me in any situation that he might have, where he can trust me with money because I give back to what, the opportunities that he's asking for. That way, even as you said too, where it's not like, oh man, when I went and paid for that milk and that rotisserie chicken, it brought me over the budget for this month, this is like the fifth person or whatever, you know what I mean?
Check your budget. It's fun. But here's the thing, is that good stewards can be more generous than bad stewards.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter how much money they make. You can make more money than the next person, but if that person's a good steward, because they know what they have and they know what they're doing, they know what to do with what they have. People that are not budgeting, they're not good stewards. I wouldn't say they're bad stewards, but they're not stewarding purposefully.
Yeah.
And they might be spending frivolously. I think what you find there is that they don't know what they can do. in generosity.
Mm.
Good stewards know what they can do.
Yeah.
And they also know when it's sacrificial.
Mm-hmm.
So I just think to speak to what you're saying is that until we really become accountable with what we actually have, I think it makes it very difficult to be what we call generous, because you haven't counted your chips.
Mm-hmm.
You don't know what you can really do.
Yeah.
And then if God challenges you beyond what you feel like you can do, you're doing it in a calculated way. It's not whimsical. It's not, I feel like it, but I'm not sure what that's going to do to me. You need to know what it's going to do to you.
Yeah.
You just need to know what it's going to do to you. And I just, yeah, I mean, I'm going to close with a recent story.
Mm-hmm.
I won't share numbers, and I want to be the person that Jesus said, don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. But before all this, before I was talking about this stuff at church and preaching on it, the Lord spoke to my heart, and occasionally he'll do this, and gave me an amount of money to give. And I'm not even saying this because I want somebody else to do this. I'm just saying I'm always learning this. And he'll just come and ask me to do something. And I don't know the significance of it at all, but it's so interesting. He asked me to give a very specific amount. Now I'm just going to tell you exactly how it went without the numbers and the details. He asked for a specific amount for me to give a specific amount. And so I was like, okay. And it wasn't crazy, but it wasn't small. And it was above and beyond. And so, okay, I'll do that. Now, I don't have extra income. I don't have anything else happening. I just know it's going to take a little bit, it's going to take a chunk out of what is. And so I was like, all right. So it took me a few days to kind of get that together, exactly where it was going to go. I couldn't do it that second, but over the next week, I got that where it was going to go. No joke. Within one more week after that, the exact amount of money that I gave, I received from a source that was outside of what normally I would receive. It was not an income source. It was not because I did something. I received the exact same amount of money, exact, without any kind of idea that would happen in any form. Not even half, not even a quarter of it. And I remember getting that amount of money back, and I thought, I just gave this amount and I just got the exact same. It didn't hurt us at all. It didn't touch us at all. And I just think it was the Lord kind of winking in my direction, like, this is how it is. I want you to be able to always do this, knowing or not knowing that where something is going to come from to replenish. And it's kind of like, if you can imagine a food pantry or a shelf, and it's got all this food. Well, you eat the food, you consume the food, you give the food away, and it depletes your pantry. But God wants to fill that back up. He wants to replenish the shelves, but he asks you to give it away first, and you don't always know what's going to happen. But being a good steward enables me to be able to do that, because I know what it costs for me and Bridget to do that. But I just think God's always challenging us. I just thought it was funny. I got the exact, to the penny, the exact same number, and it's a random number. It's not.
That's wild.
It's not like a normal number. It's a random number. Why this amount of money? That is not the first time that's happened to me in my life. I've had this happen a handful of times, not 20, not 30, but I've had it happen a handful of times, anywhere between 6 to 10 times. I've had the exact amount that God asked for me to give. He gave it back. And I was just like, he was only showing me something. That's all it was. And I just want to be more generous. I just want to be more generous to be used by God, whatever he says I want to do. And I want to encourage people to do the same.
Yeah.
I don't want to encourage people to be poor at the expense of the church. I don't want to encourage people to be whimsical or frivolous. I want people to be good stewards. I want to encourage people to manage the money well. I want people to manage what God has given to them, and really to show forth that God is funding what we put our hands to, if it's his stuff.
Amen. Yeah.
So anyways, all that to say, Beyond the Sermon, episode 2 with Iziah Dawn, Ben Dixon.
Great. Thanks for having me.
Just want to remind you guys, here's what you can do. You can always go to Pastor Ben YouTube channel. You'll see the videos there. And then also Spotify and Apple Podcasts. You just look up Pastor Ben Dixon, and these are going to be dropped there. So I don't have a specific channel for these, but there's a playlist on my YouTube channel, and there's also on my normal audio podcast. You'll just see it'll say Beyond the Sermons episode 2. And then what we have coming up for Beyond the Sermon is I'm going to be preaching a series called The Family of God, and we're going to talk about how we are in diversity, we have unity. I'm going to talk about manhood and womanhood and marriage and family and parenting and singleness and how we are all in different stages and ages and generations and backgrounds and ethnicities, and yet God has called us all together as his family to be on mission with Jesus. And so it's going to be exciting as we dive into more episodes on Beyond the Sermon. God bless you. Amen. See you then.